Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to one of the world's bigger challenges. This is Everest, 8,850 meters. And should you ever actually find yourselves standing at the foot of 3.5 vertical kilometers of rock and ice and snow, you can bring it down to just 2 numbers. And the first one is the failure rate. 3 out of every 4. And in the light of that, the other number which is useful to know is the death rate, 1%. So, what makes this not just difficult, but dangerous? And that probably seems entirely obvious. That's going to be things like avalanches, hundreds of tons of snow cascading down the mountain. And if it's not the avalanches, it's going to be the storms. Gale force wind, driving snow. These are so obviously the difficulties of Mount Everest. And these are certainly things that make for good excuses. When you are back at home in the bar trying to explain why you failed, this is good dramatic stuff. But in reality, there's something else out there. In reality, the riskiest thing that you will ever encounter on the mountain is your own team. Because it's not actually all that different from any other piece of project management. Yes, of course, your people are your key asset. But equally, your people are your greatest source of frustration. We now have no money and no equipment. Our team leader makes a decision. He will stay in Kathmandu and fight it out with customs while sending the rest of the team on up to the mountain. And of course, what he's trying to do is stop us from running up hotel bills in Kathmandu. This is a classic project decision. Short-term, financially driven in response to a crisis. And in the short term, it makes sense. But should we really be separating the leader, the one man who knows what's going on, from the rest of this very young, very new team? And in theory, all we have to do is spend the next 2 weeks walking up through these beautiful Himalayan valleys. No stress, no pressure. 2 weeks to get to know each other, to bond as a team. Two weeks to discover just how much we dislike each other. We got a second important motivator. A telephone call comes in on our satellite system. They call us from base camp to tell us that it's President Nelson Mandela, which really doesn't seem very likely. But it is. He has phoned up to say, I am proud of you. I am proud of you for trying again. I believe that you can do this. Now let's just think about this for a minute. He may have been very good at running a country, but he knows nothing about mountain climbing. He's got no idea whether we can do it. But it doesn't matter. When you come from South Africa, he's the next best thing to God. And when God calls you on the telephone and tells you you can do it, well, of course you can. We are going to live up to this. Sometimes when we look for ways to motivate people, particularly ways to motivate people cheaply, we overlook the most obvious. Recognition. And not afterwards, when everyone knows you succeeded, but at that crucial moment when nobody's quite sure whether this is going to be a great success or an embarrassing catastrophe. That's when you want the big names on your teams standing up for you. the summit of Everest, just over there. To give you a sense of scale, one of our Sherpas, Themba. Left-hand side, that's the quick way back to Camp 2. 2,500 vertical meters. The right-hand side is the quick way into China, 3,500 vertical meters. And all we have to do to get to that summit is walk along a footpath of snow as wide as one boot. Now, this is not difficult. There are ridges in the Alps that are much more technical than this. And you don't need 2,000 meters to kill yourself. 20 meters will do. And yet, this is one of the great obstacles of Everest, and it's nothing to do with the ridge. It's got to do with what's happening in our own heads. You may have heard that Everest is not that difficult, and it's true. It is one of the more straightforward mountains. And yet I've seen some top-class climbers fail. And they fail in their heads, long before the mountain itself becomes too difficult.
And for a few minutes, we are the highest people on earth. We've done it. With the flags of South Africa, of Nepal, we've done it. And we're not just celebrating on the summit. At the base camp, there's a huge party. In South Africa, it's all over the media. As you do these days, we've got a live satellite link from the summit. We're talking to a radio station in South Africa. The first thing they do is they put my mother on the line. So I've got my mother's voice coming out of the radio, and it's, "Darling, darling, where are you?" You can go to the ends of the earth, and you still can't get away from your mother. But actually, it was pretty good. You know, to stand on the summit and talk to her, sitting in our house in Johannesburg, that really was pretty special. And yet, you know, despite all this excitement, it's a curious anticlimax. You know, weeks of climbing, months of preparation, and it's a pile of snow. What is truly exciting is the view. We are so high that we can see the curve of the earth. We look out over hundreds of mountains, and every single one is lower than we are. Now that is satisfying. And I looked at all those mountains and saw potential. It had never occurred to me that I was actually good enough to climb the world's highest mountain. I was wrong. So, what else hasn't it even occurred to me to try? My biggest personal lesson was that it was time to go home and get a whole lot more ambitious.